Imagine standing in the chaos of 1815. Cannons are thundering across Europe, and the world's fate hangs on a single man, Napoleon Bonaparte. While armies fought with muskets and sabers, another war was being waged. A war of money, secrets, and information. And the man who would win it wasn't wearing a crown, but a banker's coat. This is the story of Nathan Mayer Rothschild, a German-born financier who, from the smoky streets of London, would outsmart the greatest general in modern history, not with armies, but with intelligence. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe to Blood and Fortune, where history's darkest and most extraordinary financial stories are brought back to life. Hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and stay till the end, because what you're about to hear will change how you see power forever. In the early 1800s, Europe was pure chaos. Napoleon's France dominated the continent, and the British Empire was bleeding money to fund a seemingly endless series of wars. Armies, then as now, were incredibly expensive, and governments relied on one thing to survive: credit. Whoever controlled the flow of gold ultimately controlled the outcome of wars. And no one understood this better than the Rothschilds. The family's patriarch, Mayer Amschel Rothschild, was a brilliant strategist. He had 5 sons, and he placed each one like a chess piece in a major European capital: Frankfurt, Paris, Vienna, Naples, and of course, London. Together, they created something the world had never seen before: the first truly international financial network. Think about it. Long before emails, before the telegraph, even before reliable steamships, they built a private information empire. This network used coded letters, relentless couriers on horseback, and secret financial messages that moved faster than any government could possibly react. While kings and generals waited days or weeks for official dispatches, the Rothschilds often had the news in a matter of hours. So when Napoleon began his march across Europe, the Rothschilds didn't just see danger, they saw an unparalleled opportunity. Governments were desperate for money to survive, and the Rothschilds had mastered the art of moving it, hiding it, and multiplying it. As the French armies invaded country after country, the Rothschild brothers became indispensable. They weren't just bankers. They were financial shadow operators. They financed armies on both sides of the conflict, transported huge sums of gold right through naval blockades, and moved wealth like ghosts through a continent tearing itself apart. But of all the brothers, none played the game better than Nathan Mayer Rothschild in London. He was the most audacious, the most aggressive, and the most visionary. He understood that in a world at war, information was more valuable than gold. In 1814, when Napoleon first fell and was exiled to the tiny island of Elba, the Rothschild network celebrated quietly. It seemed like the wars were finally over. But Nathan didn't rest. He was a student of history, and he knew that it rarely offers a simple, happy ending. And he was absolutely right. A year later, in 1815, Napoleon escaped from Elba. He landed in France, rallied his old supporters, and returned to power in what's known as the 100 Days. Europe panicked. The coalition against him scrambled to reassemble, and Britain once again faced the threat of financial ruin. The government needed millions to fund the fight, and they needed it immediately. Nathan Rothschild stepped forward. He became the financial engine of the British war effort. He single-handedly raised the money, coordinated massive gold shipments to the continent, and funded the Duke of Wellington's army as it prepared for the battle that would decide Europe's fate: the Battle of Waterloo. The stage was set. Wellington and his allies faced Napoleon just south of Brussels. The world held its breath. The London Stock Exchange was a storm of rumors and anxiety. A British victory would send government bond prices soaring. A defeat would mean total financial collapse. And here is where history takes a turn that most people never learned in school. When the battle ended on June 18, 1815, long before the British government or the newspapers in London knew who had won, one man already had the answer: Nathan Rothschild. His network of couriers, using boats and fresh horses, moved faster than any official army messenger. They brought him the news that Napoleon had been decisively defeated. Wellington was victorious. Armed with this priceless information, Nathan went to the London Stock Exchange. Everyone was watching him. They knew his network was the fastest. What would he do? According to many historical accounts, he began to sell. He started dumping his British government bonds. The market watched in horror. The only possible conclusion was that Rothschild knew something they didn't, that Wellington had lost. Panic selling erupted. Everyone wanted to get rid of their bonds before they became worthless. The price of British bonds collapsed, plummeting to near zero. And as the chaos reached its peak, Nathan Rothschild made his move. Through his agents, he quietly bought up every bond he could get his hands on for a fraction of their real value. A day later, Wellington's official messenger finally arrived in London with the news of the glorious victory at Waterloo. The stock market went into a frenzy. Bond prices skyrocketed, soaring higher than ever before. Nathan's profits were immense, almost unimaginable. In a single day, he had multiplied his family's fortune and secured a dominant position over British and European finance that would last for generations. Whether Nathan deliberately spread the rumor of defeat or simply used the market's panic to his advantage is still debated by historians. But the outcome is undeniable. What the sword could not conquer, the network of money and information did. Napoleon, the emperor, had lost the military battle. But in the grander scheme of things, the world had just entered a new kind of empire, the empire of finance. And the Rothschilds were its new dynasty. This story isn't just about a clever trade. It's a lesson in how power truly works. It's not always on the battlefield. Often it's in the quiet rooms where information is gathered and money changes hands. What do you think? Was Nathan a brilliant strategist or an unethical manipulator? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. The smoke of Waterloo had barely cleared, but for one family, the end of Napoleon's empire was just the beginning of their own. Europe was in ruins, its great nations crippled by debt and desperate for a lifeline. Britain alone owed a staggering amount, a sum that seemed impossible to repay. In this chaos, kings and ministers, who once scoffed at bankers, found themselves turning to one man, Nathan Rothschild. Nathan, the third son of Meyer Amschel Rothschild, had brilliantly turned the war into a financial masterstroke. But what came next would be even more impressive. He and his four brothers, strategically placed in London, Paris, Vienna, Naples, and Frankfurt, began to transform war profits into unprecedented global power. They didn't just offer loans, they offered survival. And in return, they didn't just ask for interest, they asked for influence. Imagine this: a continent on its knees. Governments needed money to rebuild cities, pay soldiers, and stabilize their economies. The Rothschilds became the go-to financiers. They loaned money to Austria to rebuild its army, to France to pay off war reparations, and to countless smaller states just to keep the lights on. But these weren't simple transactions. With each loan came a seat at the table. The Rothschilds gained insider access to government secrets, early knowledge of political shifts, and a say in major policy decisions. They weren't just bankers anymore. They were power brokers, the silent partners in the reconstruction of Europe. Their genius wasn't just in lending money, but in how they moved information. Long before the telegraph, the Rothschilds had their own private courier network. Pigeons, fast horses, and dedicated agents crisscrossed the continent, carrying messages encoded in Yiddish. This network was faster and more reliable than any government's. It meant Nathan in London knew about a political development in Vienna before the British Prime Minister did. This information advantage was their secret weapon. It allowed them to anticipate market movements, make near-certain bets on government bonds, and always stay one step ahead of their rivals. They didn't just react to the news, they often made the news. Think about the sheer scale of their operation. 5 brothers, one in each major European financial center, working in perfect concert. They communicated daily, sharing intelligence and coordinating their actions. If a government in one country was becoming unstable, the brother there would alert the others, who could adjust their investments accordingly. This family network acted like a modern-day multinational corporation, but with the speed and secrecy of a spy agency. They created a financial ecosystem where they controlled the flow of both capital and information. This coordinated strategy ensured that a loss in one branch could be offset by a gain in another, making their dynasty incredibly resilient. As Europe entered an era of industrial revolution, the Rothschilds were at the forefront, financing the very infrastructure that would define the 19th century. When railways began to snake across the continent, connecting cities and economies, it was often Rothschild money that laid the tracks. When canals were dug and telegraph lines were strung up, their financial backing was crucial. They weren't just predicting the future, they were building it. They understood that investing in these new technologies would not only bring immense profits, but would also further tighten their grip on the flow of commerce and information. Their wealth grew exponentially, but more importantly, their influence became deeply embedded in the very fabric of the modern world. However, this unprecedented power and wealth came at a steep price. As their influence grew, so did suspicion and resentment. In an era of rising nationalism and deep-seated prejudice, the Rothschilds, a Jewish family, became an easy target. Newspapers and pamphlets began to spin tales of a shadowy cabal controlling Europe from behind the scenes. They were depicted as puppet masters pulling the strings of kings and governments, profiting from war and misery. These whispers fueled anti-Semitic myths that would persist for centuries, distorting their legacy into something sinister. The family that helped rebuild Europe was simultaneously being cast as its secret enemy. They found themselves fighting a battle not just on the stock exchanges, but in the court of public opinion. Despite the smears and conspiracy theories, the truth of their achievement is undeniable. The Rothschilds were pioneers who fundamentally changed the nature of power. They were the first to truly understand and weaponize a simple but profound concept. In the modern world, information is more valuable than gold. They proved that financial power could rival, and even surpass, political and military power. Their story isn't just one of accumulating wealth, it's a story of genius, strategic vision, and impeccable timing. Mayer Amschel Rothschild, the family's patriarch, had set his sons on a path to greatness with a simple directive: work together, and trust no one outside the family. They followed his instructions to the letter. Each son became a financial titan in his own right, but their true strength lay in their unity. Their coordination was quiet, disciplined, and almost invisible to the outside world. While empires rose and fell, the Rothschild dynasty endured, adapting and thriving through political revolutions, economic crises, and world wars. In the end, the story of the Rothschilds is a powerful lesson about the nature of influence. It teaches us that power doesn't always come from a crown or a general's sword. Sometimes it comes from a ledger book and the mind of a banker who sees the world not just as it is, but as it could be. Where Napoleon's ambition for a conquered Europe fell, the Rothschilds' vision of a connected, financed Europe rose from the ashes and, in many ways, continues to shape the world we live in today. By the end of the 19th century, the name Rothschild had transcended mere wealth. It had become a symbol. To some, it meant stability. To others, secrecy. To all, it meant power. They no longer needed armies or flags. Their empire didn't exist on maps. It flowed silently through the veins of global finance, in letters, ledgers, and gold vaults scattered across Europe. What Nathan Rothschild had built in London, his brothers expanded across the continent. Amschel managed Frankfurt. James dominated Paris. Salomon ruled Vienna. Karl operated in Naples. Together they formed a network of blood and finance so interwoven that no monarch or government could rival it. They didn't just lend money to kings, they made kings. They didn't just invest in nations, they rescued them. And when the world trembled, it was often their hands, unseen but steady, that held it together. After Napoleon's defeat, the Rothschild family became indispensable to Europe's reconstruction. They helped fund railways across France, canals in Austria, and mining operations across Spain. When governments struggled to stabilize their currencies, they turned to Rothschild. When empires crumbled under debt, they turned to Rothschild. When revolutions erupted, even rebels sought their assistance. Their wealth was immense, yes, but their influence was immeasurable. They had mastered something far beyond finance: the power to decide who rose and who fell. Yet for all their success, the Rothschilds were ghosts of their own making. Their wealth invited suspicion, envy, and rumor. The world's first modern conspiracy theories were born with their name at the center. Newspapers described them as puppet masters pulling invisible strings. Caricatures depicted them as shadowy figures hoarding the world's gold. But those who truly understood economics knew the truth. The Rothschilds were not manipulating chaos. They were containing it. The family's strategy was simple but brilliant: control through trust. They never ruled overtly. They didn't overthrow monarchies or rewrite constitutions. Instead, they became the trusted hand behind the throne, the financiers who ensured wars could be won and peace could be afforded. Where politicians fought for ideology, the Rothschilds worked for stability. Their empire wasn't built on control, it was built on credibility. When a Rothschild bond was issued, investors around the world saw it as safer than gold itself. But their influence didn't just reshape Europe, it redefined the entire modern world. In 1818, they underwrote Prussia's first major international loan, setting a precedent for global finance. By the mid-1800s, the Rothschild banking network stretched from London to New York, Cairo to Calcutta. Their couriers carried more than letters, they carried intelligence. Long before the modern press or Wall Street tickers, the Rothschilds knew what was happening across continents within hours. Information was their weapon, secrecy was their shield, and timing, that was their art. Nathan once said, "The man who controls the money supply controls the empire." But what he really meant was simpler. Whoever knows first, wins. This principle turned the Rothschilds into the silent architects of the 19th century. They financed Britain's wars, Austria's recovery, and even France's modernization under the very empire Napoleon's successors built. They played no sides, they played every side, ensuring that no matter who won or lost, the Rothschild family remained the constant. Still, their power came with tragedy. The dynasty's obsession with unity led to intermarriage among cousins, a way to protect the family fortune from being divided or absorbed by outsiders. But it also led to heartbreak, illness, and isolation. The very system that made them powerful also trapped them in their own bloodline. They became a family both worshipped and cursed, envied by the public, yet prisoners of their own legacy. And yet, their story is not a tale of corruption or greed. It's a testament to how information, trust, and strategy can reshape civilization. They built the world's first international financial safety net long before globalization existed. Their private banks became the foundation upon which modern central banking would later stand. The Bank of England, the Banque de France, and countless others borrowed methods, and sometimes people, from the Rothschild system. Even as their direct dominance faded in the 20th century, their influence never truly vanished. The family's methods, diversification, intelligence gathering, long-term positioning, became the blueprint for every major financial institution that followed. They taught the world that real power doesn't shout. It whispers, from boardrooms, from balance sheets, from behind locked doors. By the dawn of the 1900s, the Rothschilds had become both legend and myth. The Industrial Revolution had birthed new tycoons, Rockefellers, Morgans, Carnegies. But the Rothschilds were different. They didn't chase fame. They didn't flaunt their power. They stayed in the shadows, watching as others repeated the same mistakes they had already mastered avoiding. When global crises struck, the Panic of 1873, the market collapses of the early 1900s, the looming wars, the Rothschild institutions were among the few that remained steady. Their gold reserves became Europe's insurance policy. Their intelligence network, still unrivaled, warned them of collapses long before the rest of the world saw them coming. And then, the world changed again. 2 world wars tore through the very continent they helped build. Empires fell, monarchies vanished, the old order dissolved. The Rothschilds lost power in name, but not in spirit. Even as revolutions stripped them of banks and property, their legacy survived in the global systems that replaced them. The international bond markets, central banks, and private equity networks that define capitalism today. Their descendants still work quietly across finance, philanthropy, and environmental initiatives, rarely public, always strategic. The Rothschilds no longer control empires, but the systems they invented do. And that's what makes their story timeless. The defeat of Napoleon was not the victory of one man. It was the dawn of a new kind of empire. One that did not need borders or soldiers. One that could not be toppled by war or revolution. One built on knowledge. To understand the Rothschilds is to understand the blueprint of modern power. They proved that in a world driven by chaos, the calmest mind wins. That wealth without strategy is temporary. But information lasts forever. They turned whispers into influence, letters into legacies, and risk into immortality. As the world enters new financial storms, digital currencies, collapsing banks, endless debt, the question remains, have we learned from the past? Or are we once again walking blind into the same traps the Rothschilds once saw coming a century before us? Perhaps that's the haunting genius of their legacy. The Rothschilds didn't just outsmart Napoleon, they outsmarted time itself.